Base, already done once again, because we're just going to focus on the eyes once again. Let's get into part 3, the final chapter. This ending, I don't think you're ready. Just looking in my little mirror here, so don't mind me. Let's talk about the trial. So, the 19th of April, 1966, the day everyone had been waiting for, was the day that the trial of Ian Brady and Myra Hindley began. They were being charged with the murders of 10-year-old Leslie Ann Downey, 12-year-old John Kilbride, and 17-year-old Edward Evans. Sir Elwyn Jones, who was the Attorney General for England, led the prosecution, and eminent Queen counsels represented Brady and Hindley, and they pleaded not guilty. The trial lasted for 2 weeks, 14 days, with Ian Brady testifying for 8 hours and Myra Hindley testifying for 6 hours. This all took place at Chester Castle and constantly surrounded by the public and the media. Journalist Clive Entwistle said that these murders attracted media from all over the world, saying, "We were writing things for America, Australia, Asia, everywhere." It was a huge international story because it was children. To describe the atmosphere in the courtroom, in the words of David Smith, one word: tense. Every second of it. Very, very frightening. David Smith was the chief prosecution witness at the trial, and he was there to give evidence about the murder of Edward Evans, because he was there for the murder of Edward Evans. David said that it all seemed very Americanized, with like all the media, everything being wired up with microphones, and the fact that Brady and Hindley were just sat there in their little bulletproof dock. Apparently everybody was really surprised by how Brady and Hindley were acting during the trial. They came across quite nonchalant, almost a bit cocky. Mainly Brady though, because apparently Myra was taken a little bit more seriously and like taking down notes, handing them to defense, whereas Brady was just standing there looking bored and uninterested the entire time. But according to David, they were acting as if this was all just a game. Like they were happy that this was such a big thing, and like there was media everywhere and they were the focus. Brady was trying to downplay Hindley's role in all of the murders, just trying to keep her out of it as much as he could, but Hindley didn't want that. She wanted to be his equal in all of this, which is a lot different than how it ended up being not long after, with her then trying to take herself away from the murders, putting herself just outside of the situation. But during the trial, she wanted people to know that she was just as much involved as Brady. Now, she could have just done what he said, just go along with the fact that she wasn't as involved, and she would have probably not got as bad of a sentence as she did. She could have gone down the route of, I only went along with this because I was scared that Brady was going to do the same thing to me. Like, she could have very easily played that role, but didn't. She wanted to stand by him and say, I did just as much as he did. Now, to say that Hindley took more of an in-charge role, that didn't even make sense. Took more, I don't even know how to word this. Nikki, find your words. She was more in charge, not in charge, they're in trial. Nikki. While they were in court, she stood there with just like this really like stone face, didn't let anything get to her, didn't stumble on her words, didn't make a single mistake. She just stood there with a stone face, the same stone face as her mugshot. Like this look, she just kept the entire time. Whereas Brady did make a few mistakes and stumble over some of his lies. Like, he was caught out on a few little occasions. But because Hindley was acting the way she was, she came across as more of a villain, a monster type of person to the public because she didn't show any remorse. She seemed very scary. Now, their defense strategy was to just pin all of it on David Smith. And David Smith said, "They accused me of things that had no evidence behind it whatsoever." Apparently they just threw everything they had onto their lie of it being all David Smith's fault. Like, they would reveal little details to make it seem as though it was David, but again had no evidence that David was even there. But David did say that this did ruin his image with the public, because even though it did come out, obviously, that David had nothing to do with it, there's like, with everything that they were saying, some things did stick with the public, and that's something that he was never able to shake off. The worst part of the trial, hands down, was when they played the 13-minute tape of torture out loud to everyone, with Clive Entwistle saying, when the tape was played in court, there was absolute silence. You could see tears in people's eyes, and apparently you could even see hardened police officers with watery eyes. Entwistle continued by saying, "It was one of the most harrowing things I think that has ever been played in a British courtroom." When it came time for a decision, the jury took 2 hours to deliberate, but eventually, on May 6th, 1966, Ian Brady was found guilty of all 3 murders, and Myra Hindley was found guilty of 2, that of Leslie Ann Downey and Edward Evans. When asked how he felt about the outcome, David answered with only one word: delighted. Whilst they were leaving the courtroom, the crowd outside booed the cars as they went by. Not quite the stars they wanted to be, are they? Unless, they loved it. They probably did. Brady and Hindley were given multiple life sentences, and they were actually the first British serial killers, that was a mouthful, the first British serial killers to ever not receive a death sentence. And the usual punishment at that time was a hanging. But just 4 weeks prior, Parliament abolished the death sentence in the UK. People weren't happy about this because it was already known that they had done what they had done before Parliament had made this decision to get rid of the death penalty. So people were saying, well, they should still get the death penalty because everyone knew about this before they were sentenced. But obviously, the law being the law, they didn't receive the death sentence, but received multiple life sentences. David Smith said, "I'm glad they didn't hang them. If they'd have hung them, they'd have taken everything to the grave with them." That is very, very true, because they didn't confess about Pauline Reade or Keith Bennett for decades. Like 20 years had gone by before they found Pauline Reade. Even after their arrests, they still remained in the headlines, like spoken about in the media for the next 50 years. And that's not still just talking about what had been spoken about so many times at that point. They did things in prison to keep themselves in the media, in the public eye. I'll get into those shortly. Now, after being arrested, sentenced, they've gone to jail. They never saw each other again. But they did write back and forth to each other for 6 years after their arrests. In those letters, there were actually secret little codes that they'd send to each other. Like, the first letter of every line spelled out a different message, like a secret that they were trying to send back and forth to each other. And those secret codes were usually about their sadistic sexual fantasies. At one point, they did actually try to get married so that then they would be given visitation rights. But it wasn't long after that Hindley cut all ties with Brady. I was very shocked when I read that, because if one was going to cut ties with the other, I would have thought that it would have been Brady cutting ties with Hindley. I don't know why, but I was like, oh, she cut things off? Why? I shall tell you why. Don't you worry. Lucky for you, I have the answer right here. Now, The reason why Hindley cut Brady off was because she started what was described as a very intense relationship with a prison warder that went by the name of Patricia Kearns. Now, Patricia Kearns was described as a very nice and kind woman, and it was said that a lot of the inmates were attracted to her because she was a very attractive young woman. In a memoir that Hindley wrote and then passed on to Janie Jones for safekeeping, she states that Kearns, who was a former nun, helped to restore her faith, writing, "An instrument of God's grace. Her fingers touched my soul and awakened it from its long sleep, and her voice, her words of encouragement, a quiet conviction, penetrated the very core of my heart." Poetic. Now, as the relationship intensified some more, it became very well known within the prison, Holloway, that they were in a relationship. And this led Janie Jones to warning Patricia Kearns that this maybe isn't the best situation, telling her, whatever you're doing, please stop it. And Janie Jones was not wrong with what she was thinking, because Hindley had some thoughts going on in her little noggin. She wrote in her memoir, "Hope faded and freedom, release from prison, faded with it. Escape seemed to be the only road to freedom, and I asked her to escape with me." 6 weeks later, there were headlines after headlines after headlines stating that Patricia Kearns had tried to help Myra Hindley escape from prison. Their plan was to escape the country and flee to South America. They did have another plan, which was to go to a convent in Germany that Kearns knew about. So with that second option in mind, Hindley took it upon herself to start learning German in preparation for her big move. They did prepare quite a lot for this escape. They even went as far as copying prison keys by imprinting the key into a bar of soap so that they had the mould. But obviously they were caught. Now, following this whole thing, Patricia Kearns then ended up in court and was sentenced to 6 years in prison. Now, Hindley wrote a lot about her guilt over the sentencing of Kearns, which is something she never ever did about her victims. Like, she never showed remorse for her victims, but felt so unbelievably sad about the sentencing of her new girlfriend. Was it because they were caught and she didn't get what she wanted? I don't know. You tell me. Now, as you can see, Hindley's days in jail were filled with drama, a lot of it. But on the other end, Brady was very isolated and bored. Brady kept asking to be moved to a prison hospital, and he was denied of this wish for 20 years. But eventually he did get his wish, because in November 1985 he was diagnosed as a psychopath. Took him 20 years, huh? I need to keep my opinions to myself. After his diagnosis, he was sent to a high security hospital in Merseyside. Now, following his diagnosis, Hindley said, "I don't think he's as mad as the doctors believe he is. And although he's obviously got problems, he's shrewd and intelligent, as he always was. Most of my friends believe this move is in my interest, and could be even valuable, with even a positive response from the Home Office. But as I said, I'm reserving my judgment." Myra Hindley was also transferred during her prison time. In the 1980s, she was taken to Cookham Prison in Kent. A woman called Vanessa Frake, who is a prison official, arrived at Cookham Prison because she was told to transfer inmates from Holloway Prison to Cookham Prison. So she arrives and she's greeted by another officer, who she obviously then follows somewhere else. As she was sat down, she was asked what she would like to drink by a woman with a very dodgy brown cardigan with a few holes in it that was clearly too big for her, and mousy brown hair. This woman was Myra Hindley. As Myra Hindley walks away to do the drinks order, the woman that greeted Vanessa Frake at the gate said, "You know who that was, right?" And Frake said, "No, should I?" And they were like, that's Myra Hindley. She was like, that was Myra Hindley? She said, I wouldn't have been able to recognise her if I just walked past her on the street. The amount of people that went and visited Hindley and said that she looked like she could just serve you at your local shop. Like, she looked just like your everyday woman. And Vanessa Frake said, the most remarkable thing about Myra Hindley was that she was totally unremarkable. In the mid-1980s, Myra Hindley finally cleared David Smith of any involvement in the murders, and then further confessed to being involved in all 5 killings. In her confessions, she didn't apologise even one time to the families of the victims. She just made it all about her and tried everything to put herself in a better light, saying things like, I've changed, I'm a different person now, further proving even more that everything that these 2 people did was very self-serving. I had a bit of a mare with my makeup, but we're back. What were we saying? Should we talk a little bit about Janie Jones? Janie Jones, for any of you that don't know, was a pop singer before she went to prison. A very successful one at that. And with this knowledge, Hindley asked Janie if she would help her prepare for the annual Arthur Koestler Awards. This award offers monetary prizes for artistic achievement to British prisoners worldwide. Janie said yes and helped her with her breathing, her notes, just helped her sing. So they each did 3 songs each. And Janie had a tape recorder, which means that she now has 3 tape recordings of Myra Hindley singing.
Kilowatt was an aging con of 65 who stood a chance to stay alive and leave the joints and walk the streets again. As the time he was to leave drew near, he suffered all the joy and fear of leaving 35 years in the pen. Then on the day of his release, he was approached by the police, took him to the warden, walking slowly by his side. The warden said, you won't remain here, but it seems the state retainer claims another 10 years of your life.
Why is that spine-chilling? She said that Hindley had a sweet, little, gentle voice you'd never expect with a serial killer. Again, chilling. I don't know why I've been sat like this for so long. This is so puffy. Right, wind your neck in. Myra let the judges of this competition believe that she wrote the 3 songs herself, which led her to being awarded first place. And Janie Jones, the worldwide pop singer, successful pop singer, placed 3rd. Myra Hindley came first. You can't make this up. Janie even said that Myra had the audacity to say to me at one point, do you think you can get me a recording contract? Like Janie said, the audacity. I'm sorry. Can you imagine? I shouldn't laugh. I'm not laughing. But can you imagine Myra Hindley getting a recording contract? Can you imagine?
I'm tired of this, Grandpa!
That's too damn bad!
Enough. In the 1990s, Hindley's health rapidly deteriorated due to being overweight and a heavy smoker. Writing about this, Hindley said, I never longed for death. In all the years in prison, facing an unknown, obscure and even doubtful future, I've never wished to die. Myra Hindley died from a brain aneurysm and bronchial pneumonia on the 15th of November 2002 at the age of 60 years old. She had what was described as a highly unusual nighttime funeral, and her coffin had to have a police escort. Janie Jones took it upon herself to send press cuttings of the headlines about Hindley's death to Ian Brady. And in response, Brady said, please keep sending the newspaper cuttings, which have been churned out non-stop since the death in November. one wonders just how many more worms will crawl out of the woodwork. So again, self-fulfilling. Was more worried about what was going to come out about him after her death than about her death. Brady showed no interest in Hindley after her death. Like, he never mentioned her in any of his letters. It was as if she never existed obviously she didn't exist anymore, but like, even the thought of her didn't exist to him. In his letters, he was still very much writing to the public. Like, this wasn't just for Jenny Jones. In one of his letters, he wrote, "A fourth attempt at a film about the case has appeared in the press, this time with my fellow Glaswegian John Hannah accepting my role. You perhaps recall him from 4 Weddings and a Funeral. They must be running short of criminals in this country." So, even after all of this time, he's still keeping up with himself in the press. He also wrote in one of his letters saying, "Have you ever seen the film The Truman Show? Well, that's what the past 40 years has been like. Maybe if you didn't do what you did, or when you got to prison, just let it be. It's the constant keeping yourself in the media's eye, in the public eye, that's kept the media and the public looking at you. You did it to yourself." Now, Ian Brady was clearly a very evil man, but in the words of David Smith, Brady slept with the devil, and that was her. Ian Brady outlived Myra Hindley by 15 years, but on May 15th, 2017, Ian Brady died of natural causes at the age of 79. He was cremated at 10 o'clock at night at Southport Crematorium. There was no family present, no music playing, and no flowers to be seen. This story, to this day, has never ended. Like, there's always a new twist, a new turn, whether that's discovery of new victims, confessions decades later, a diagnosis, an attempted escape. Even Hindley's relationships created bumps, and her pledge of innocence. The list goes on and on and on. It's still never been a fully closed case because Keith Bennett's remains have still not been found to this day. When I tell you I am so glad to be done with this case, because as interesting as it was, I hate that these two very, very evil human beings, if we can even call them that, will unfortunately be remembered for a very, very long time. And I know that I'm talking about them right now, and I hate that. It's what we're all interested in, apparently. But yeah, the fact that they'll be talked about for decades and decades. Like, it's nearly been 100 years since those people were brought onto planet Earth, when really the ones that should be remembered and spoken about forever and ever and ever until the end of time are 16-year-old Pauline Reed, who left her home that day to go to a dance near her home. 12-year-old John Kilbride, who was a schoolboy making some pocket money at a local market. 12-year-old Keith Bennett, who was on his way to a local market after just saying goodbye to his mother. 10-year-old Leslie Ann Downey, who was taken from a fairground on Boxing Day. And 17-year-old Edward Evans, who was an apprentice engineer that trusted his killer. Okay, so we've reached the end of the Moors murders case. That was deep. That was it's a very intense case. I did say that at the very start of the first part episode, if you will, but it's heavy. It's a heavy one. Quite a big one to start on. Nice going, Nick. But yes, this brings us to the end of our first little true crime series thing we got going on here. Also, finish my makeup, obviously. That part's not important right now. The next video I put out will be about a completely different true crime case. I'm going to leave it a secret for now. But yes, what a case. I'm glad to be done with those people. Let's leave them in the past, shall we? Let's just leave them there. Be gone. If you did enjoy this journey that we've been on these last couple of weeks, subscribe, hit the notification bell so you can see my next upload, see what the next case that we're going to explore is. You don't want to miss it because we started strong and we're not going downhill anytime soon. We are only going to elevate. So buckle up and subscribe. Just subscribe. You won't regret it, I promise. I am very excited to see you next time. Goodbye.